All right, guys, I'm gonna take you with me. Knocking the seat down. This is the 71 Ford F100 360 V8. There's some videos out on YouTube that are pretty good about how the gauges work on these units, and this applies to Fords of that era. And I don't remember the exact years, but roughly like 1968 to 1972, something like that. There are some differences, especially in the panel, in the instrument panel. Later models have a electronics board or PCB, where the older ones don't. But the circuit that runs the sensors, like like the oil sensor, fuel sensor, temperature sensor, it's all one circuit for primary voltage. You'll see people online tell you that it's a 5-volt circuit, and that's not true technically. What it actually is pulsed 12 volts. So for every 1 second, 12 volts, in that 1 second, 12 volts is only on for a short period of time. And what that does, the gauges on the display or on the instrument panel they're current sensors. They sense how much current is running through a circuit, and depending on how much current, the gauge will go up or down based on that current. I'm not going to get into the deep theory of how that works, but the width of that pulse can change based on the load that all the sensors are putting on it. And that voltage is created by a component behind your dashboard that's called the instrument panel voltage regulator, or you'll see it acronym the IPVR. It's a little device that's back there. That's what's putting out that pulsed voltage. You can test the circuit using a test light and putting that on the positive lead to your sensors, and you'll see the light will blink as that pulse turns on and off. And that is 12 volts when it's on, but it's not on all the time. So any multimeter that you have, or voltage meter, that reads RMS current, or root mean square current, or root mean square voltage rather. And when it looks at that entire second with that 12 volt pulse, what it actually sees of usable power is about 5 volts. And that's why people will tell you if you put a multimeter on it, you should see 5 volts. But it's actually going to pulse. If you have an old analog unit, you'll see the needle bounce. And if you have a digital multimeter, you're going to see the voltage is going to run around. But if you set it to like high, you should see it say 12 volts, even though that's not the functional voltage that the sensor's seeing. So I don't know if that's a good explanation, but that's how it works. You're getting a pulse 12 volt signal. It's not on for very long compared to an entire second, right? It's like in a second, you might see one little finger of a pulse if you look at it with an oscilloscope, which just shows you voltage over time. But most people don't have that. So I'm gonna go ahead. I bought a replacement. This is a Leyland unit. Model number is SUFD 34. My gas tank's in the cab, so this is a top-down unit. They sell a different version for some Fords in this year range. They were sideways in the tank, and so not the same device. There's some different versions. So that's it. I'm going to take you along with me. I'm going to show you how I know that, or how I think I know that it's the gauge, or the sensor itself, or what they call the fuel sending unit, fuel level sending unit. How I think that's the reason, or that's the bad part. I'll show you what we do, and you can do this for all the sensors in here to test them. I'll show you what that looks like, because you could have a bad voltage regulator, and then all your gauges will be bad. Or if you only have one gauge that's not reading, it's likely a broken wire, which would cause a problem, or it's a bad sensor. So I'm going to show you on the gas, the fuel sending unit sensor, how that looks. And then from there, I'll take you with me as we pull that out, see what the problem is. My assumption is the arm's broken off or the float's broken, but we're gonna put the new one in and go from there. Now this unit has some of these models, depending on your year and what version you got, some of these models started having emissions control on it. So we're gonna have to take off one of those lines to get this unit out. I'll show you what that looks like. Some years don't have this and some models won't have this on there, so it'll just be the sensor and unscrew it and off you go. You gotta have power, obviously, to check this. And yeah, let's get after it and see what we can do. All right, so here you can see this is behind the seat tank. I got the seat pulled down. You can see all the emissions control. To get this off, we're just going to pull off these hose clamps and pull this off. Hopefully, I mean, this is old. Hopefully it doesn't break on me. But you can see the gas tank sensor is hiding under there. And we've got to be able to get into that. Now, just because your gauge doesn't read, right, but other gauges do, that doesn't mean it's the sensor itself. Don't go spend, 30, 40, 70 bucks on buying a new one. You could have a bad ground. Right, this ground could be bad, and just because this is tied into the cab, that doesn't mean that the ground that ties the cab to the frame or the frame to the motor isn't bad. So that could be your problem too. I'll show you in a minute what it looks like when we test this, and you'll see in this particular case, I know my wires are good because when I short them together, I get a full gauge. All right, and you can use clamps to do that, or you can simply you can ground the red lead, or what looks orange nowadays because it's old, but you can ground this lead. This is the positive. We can ground that out and see if the gauge moves. So let's turn the ignition on. We won't start it. You don't need to start it, but let's turn the ignition on here. Maybe. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe. There we go. All right, so I turned the ignition on. You can see oil pressure shows something. But my fuel gauge is dead. I don't know if you can see that. Like, big glare. Yeah. So you can see it is completely dead. So what you can do, let's go back over here. We can pull this off. This is our hot lead, so this should have pulsed voltage. So let's do that real quick. I know I'm holding this in my hand, so you're gonna have to bear with me. Let me get you on the tripod and see what we can do here. One sec. All right, I'm working around the tripod, so my apologies if I get in your way. But what we can do is we can take the voltmeter, and I have a Fluke 87. That's not what you need. That's just what I have. So you'll see we're in voltage DC, and what we can do is just quickly go from that wire. You're not gonna be able to see this very well. I'll try to show it to you, but we can go positive to ground. And I got nothing. Let me start her up. Oh. Let me grab you real quick. We don't have anything there, so that's a problem. But it's a problem of my own making. So let's get over here. And that's my problem. Because of that dragging brake, I keep pulling the ground off. Okay, that ought to be better. Now we have power. Didn't I just say you have to have power? I'm talking out of my rear end. Anyway, sorry about that. And again, I'm going to try to do this. I don't know if you're going to be able to see. Probably not going to be able to. But we'll get on that. And we'll ground this out. And I don't know if you can see that. It's not going to do a good reading. But you'll see it's bouncing, shows 2 volts, nothing, overload, back and forth. So I can see that there's pulsed voltage on there. I don't know if you can see that very well, but we have voltage. I don't know exactly what it is, but that's a good sign. That means that IP VR is running. I don't know if you could see that very well, but on my meter, your meter might be different. I'm just seeing it pulse from 0 to overload, and then it tries to read, but then the voltage goes away too quick. But what we can do, let me move you back here, take you off the tripod. Oh, give you vertigo. All right, so you see now that we have power, you'll see fuel meter is 0. But if I short these together, what we will see, I don't know if you can see that very well. Let's zoom in. You can see while these wires back here are shorted together, that fuel pump is going up. So that tells me my gauge is good and my wiring is good. Now I just let those go, and it's not going to immediately fall. All right. But you'll see now it's falling back to 0. So that tells me the voltage regulator is good. That tells me the wiring is good. Right, my ground is good. My power cable coming from the regulator out here to the sensor is good. So what that tells me is I've got a bad sensor in the tank. So that's got to come out and get replaced. And you can do that for the temp sensor and the oil sensor and all sorts of stuff. So that's pretty much it. After a few minutes, you'll see, or a few seconds, really, not really minutes, it's already back down to 0. So we're good to go there. I'm going to pull the ground wire off because I don't want to have any voltage back there. Right, that's a gas tank. I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'm going to have to take off the breather neck. Hopefully this isn't as bad as I think it's going to be. We're going to find out though. I'm guessing it's going to be a freaking nightmare. Yeah, this is not going to go well. I'm already breaking the hose. So I'm going to have to probably get some new fuel hose for this, is what's going to end up having to happen. Yep. Oh, and that's garden hose. Someone's got garden hose on there. Oh well. Yeah, that's what you find sometimes. That's garden hose. I can't even get it off of there, but I'm pretty certain someone put their garden hose on there. Oh well. It is what it is. Certainly smells like freaking... Certainly smells like gasoline in here now. All right. Okay, and the kit I bought has screws, but we're going to save those just in case. Sometimes you never know. All right. So that unit's out. It sounds like the float's in okay shape back in there. Yeah? Okay. So my guess is this bad boy's just dead. That's what the float looks like. Let's see. And it smells gas-ish. It don't smell great though. I'm actually wondering if that bad boy is just fine, but we're gonna replace it anyway. That's the O-Ridge. When I look down in there, there's not a lot of gas, and it smells a bit like turpentine. So I think it's probably time to run her Here's a replacement. Looks exactly the same style of float. Let's get, and here's a little kit of accessories that came with it. Before we get too far, and you don't need to adjust that arm should be proper for the unit, whether it's empty or full. What I want to do, they gave me new screws here, and I want to see, without dropping them in the tank, are they the right size? And they are the right size. They come with little lock washers. Okay, that's a good deal. All right, so what we're gonna do, and I don't think this has any sort of reason to, you know, to be one way or the other, but we're just gonna feed this back in. Hopefully you can see that. We'll get it back in like that. And then I'm going to use, the older screws are longer, I'm going to use them to get the rubber lined up. Hopefully. Let's put one in. Going on, little buddy? Do not have that like that. Yeah. All right, I know this, I'm in your way and you can't see. Now, unfortunately, now that I can see in the tank at how much fuel is in there, the gauge may have actually been reading correctly. I just assumed that it wasn't right, which, you know. But I don't know, for 40 bucks or whatever I paid for it, I'd rather put a new one in and know we're in good shape. Now here's another thing. Do not run 12 volts to this circuit. And I don't care what sensor it is. Don't run 12 volts around. Don't apply 12 volts off the battery to this, because you will burn up all of your sensors. They're made to run at 5 volts, and that's why the circuit is maintaining that 5 volts. If you attempt to run 12 volts, you'll burn up all your sensors, and then you'll be in a world of hurt. All right. For whatever reason, that last hole is just not lining up, as one would expect. So we're gonna have to wiggle it a bit, see what we get. Let's see, can we use that? All right, and that's it. Let me take you over here and have a look. So that was that. That's it in place. This just plugs into the screw. This just plugs into the ground. I don't know if you can see that. Now that's not very tight, and that could cause a problem with the ground connection, so I need to mess around with that connector. So let's play with it a minute. You got to be careful when you do this, because you can quickly cause problems. All right, just grab me some lineman pliers. When you do this, you need to be super careful. Let me bring in close. This is just a spade connector, and if you squeeze this too hard or you put too much pressure on it, you will destroy it. But what we're going to do is just give this just the slightest bit of a squeeze to tighten it up. You don't want to squeeze it from the outside. You want to squeeze it this direction, like this, like pinch it. You want this to roll in just a bit more. But if you do it too hard, you'll crush it, and then it won't go on at all. So, wish me luck. I think that was good enough. Did I overdo it? Maybe. Maybe. What you can do, if you do squeeze it a bit too much, you can kind of pry the end open a touch. Just give yourself a little bit of room to get it on there. But you want those teeth to bite. You want those little hooks to squeeze onto that metal, have a good solid contact. I might have overdone it. I just got a little jeweler's screwdriver. What I did on that, if we're looking at that, normally these sit like this, and I squeezed them down too much. So I'm going to use this to kind of get in there and pry that open just a touch. And you don't need to do the whole thing, you just need to do the front. You just need enough room to get it on there. And remember, these will bounce around a bit, so, but you want to have them on there pretty tight. All right, so that's that. We should work. Let's go ahead. Well, you know what we're gonna do. Give me a second. I'm gonna find some tape. I'm just gonna tape that on. All right, after 20 minutes of looking, I found some electrical tape. So we'll see if that works. I mean, I suspect it will. I suspect we'll be just fine. But gotta make sure I get this back in the right spot. This is just temporary. I'll get some fuel hose. I'll get some fuel hose when I'm down at the hardware store. It's a bit of a trip, so you know what we're gonna do. This is always a nightmare to try to wrap, but whatever. We'll give it a shot. There we go. Oh yeah, that ought to work. I'm sure that's fire marshal approved. Anyhow, I guess now that we're on, let's let me get you out of here. Move this out of the way. Let's take you back this direction. So we're back and connected. Now granted, after I looked in that tank, there ain't a whole lot of fuel in there, so we may just be low on fuel. Maybe you should trust your gauges. Whatevs, man. Whatevs. All right. So turn it on. Nope, it's working now. So you can see it moved a little bit. I don't know how far it's gonna go. It's down and empty though. I mean, there's probably only, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 inches in there. So, but it wasn't doing anything before, and now it's doing something. So anyway, that's it. Now the only other one I have is the temp gauge doesn't work. All right, well I got a mess to clean up, as always. But that's it. So basic understanding of the Ford 1968 to 1972, 73, something like that. Instrumentation circuit. All of the positive leads are just pulsed 12 volts. Functionally, it's about 5 volts. And then what actually happens, if you want to know a basic understanding, each of the sensors changes its resistance. And so when the resistance changes, the current in that circuit changes. And the current in that circuit goes back to the gauge, right? It goes through the sensor. If you think about a wire, goes through the sensor, right, back to the gauge. The gauge and the sensor are in the same circuit, and as the sensor's changing resistance, it's changing the current in the gauge, and the gauge is reading that current and changing its position based on the current it reads. So like for the fuel tank, if there's no resistance, right, and that means that float is all the way up, that's at the minimum amount of resistance, that means the current is high in that circuit and the gauge goes all the way to full. But as the arm falls, the resistance gets higher and higher. That lowers the current in the circuit, and the gauge will fall down towards empty. Similarly, on the temperature sensor, similar process, except the resistance is changing based on temperature, and the current in that circuit changes whether it's, it shows you cold temp or high temp. The only other issue you could find in the circuit is if you have a broken wire. But remember, a broken wire, if you did the test and you shorted that out and you did not get a reading, that can mean one of two things. You've already tested your voltage, so it's not the voltage regulator. That can mean you have a broken wire somewhere, or maybe a corroded wire on the positive side. Or maybe you have a bad ground. You can maybe use a different ground and see if it moves the gauge. If it's the positive wire coming from the voltage regulator, though, it could be a broken a broken wire, right? So if the wire breaks, it's open, that's infinite resistance, and so it's going to show you nothing on the gauge. Or it could be the gauge itself, right? So the only way to test that would be get back behind the gauge and short it out there. But remember, do not apply 12 volts from the battery to this. Do not use a test light to attempt to troubleshoot this circuit. You can use a test light directly between those wires, hook your ground to the ground wire, and then use the test light to see if you have that pulsed voltage. But do not put 12 volts from the battery on this circuit, or you will burn things up. What's next? I do have a temp sensor. I do think because the radiator is higher than the engine block, if I just pull the sensor out, it's going to dump coolant everywhere, so I'm going to have to figure that out. I don't know if I'll do that on camera or not. I did get a new ground cable. We'll put that in. I did get some Rotella T4. We'll change some oil. New air filter. I got a new breather filter too. I'll show you what that is. That's inside the air box. And that's it for now. The only other thing is the tire, flat tire over there. So we'll see. Obviously I got to get that fixed if I want to go and fill the gas tank up and see if it works. I don't particularly want to drag. I think that's a 19-gallon tank or an 18-gallon tank. I don't want to bring that here in 5-gallon drum or 5-gallon gas cans. So I got to get that tire fixed. Maybe I'll bring you along for that. I have a plug kit. If I can find a hole in it or a nail or something, I can just plug it. If it's a broken bead, then it's maybe time for new tires anyway. Brakes, we got brakes. Got to get that engine cleaned off. I got to find that oil leak. A lot of stuff, so stay tuned. Hopefully I can get out videos a little more regular. Not sure if it'll be explicitly on the truck. I've got some other things going, like the water house and things like that. So, but I'll bring you along no matter what I'm doing, right? It's all part of taking care of the household. So, if anybody has any questions, put them below. If you know, and I can look it up too, but if you know the model years that this instrument panel voltage regulator was used, and it's more exacting than my guesstimation, throw that below too. If I'm doing something stupid, feel free to put that below too. I've never owned a 71 Ford F100, so I'm learning as you guys learn. But yeah, so that's it. If you want to see more and keep up with it, subscribe, and yeah, hopefully we'll hang out again later. Take care of yourselves.